Well, again, it's a joy to be here with all of you, and all of you are my friends. And I come here, it seems like every year. I've missed a few years along the way. And for those of you who don't know me, which I don't know if there's anybody here who I don't know and recognize, so maybe I'll just share a little bit about where I've been most recently. I was just coming from New Zealand. I was in New Zealand the last 2 weeks. I flew to the US on Tuesday. Before that, I was in India, and I'll talk a little bit about our monastery and the development there, but then I'll talk about the way of now, which was the topic this evening, which is really about transcending time and being in the eternal now, is how Yogananda put it. One of the things about traveling with jet lag and changing time zones is that you really see the delusion of time, that is just a fantasy, because you fly one place to another, the time is different, it's all of a sudden day and night, it's still the same day, or it's 2 days later, and you just get totally confused. And you realize that time is just this, especially the way that we work with it, is something that we just sort of invented. And yes, it's hard to get out of that sense of time, but I'll talk about that tonight as really something that really is important to really getting out of stress, out of anxiety, and finding a sense of peace and calmness in ourselves. In New Zealand, you'll get the joy of having 3 of our New Zealand really core people, the 3 core people visiting here in Palo Alto in about a week or 10 days. Will they be doing a satsang or something here? Will they be meeting people in the community maybe? Try to get a chance to meet them. It was such a joy. It was the first time I'd ever been to New Zealand, and these are real Ananda people. They're just full-time serving to some degree, but their lives are dedicated to sharing the teachings, spreading Master's work, Swamiji's teachings in New Zealand. And it was the first time I've ever been in that country, and I can see why everybody wants to move to New Zealand. Talk about getting away from stress and anxiety. It's on the other side of the planet. It's down under. It's away from all the drama that we face in the northern part of the world. And just the people also, nature there is extraordinarily rich and beautiful and gentle. There's no poisonous snakes or creatures there. You go to Australia and it's just, you read stories about all the poisonous snakes and spiders and different things. In New Zealand, the people too are very gentle and good. And so really encourage you to try to meet them and spend time with them when they visit. And then before that, I was in India. We have, as I think everyone here knows, we're building a monastery in North India. We started this project around 2018, 19, 20, right around in the middle of the pandemic. We decided to find land, build a proper monastery, really the first one Ananda will ever have. And progress is going really, really well. We've gone, it's taken us years to get all the government permissions. Construction is beginning. Walls are going up. And sometime by the end of the year, we could be starting to move in there, and some of us live there. And we have a group of monks that's really the most extraordinary group of really deep, committed, in tune Ananda souls and monks that I think Ananda has ever had. And I'm biased because I'm helping to guide them, but I'm sincere when I say that. These are souls who came after Swami Kriyananda left the body, and they're coming because of Swamiji. They saw a video of Swamiji, had a deep spiritual experience, transcendent experience really in 1 or 2 cases, and they watch Swami videos on their own. It's like you meet them one day and, I saw the Swami video yesterday, and that's where he said such and such. And there's just a real avid connection to Swami Kriyananda, more than I think some people when he was alive had with him. And I think this is the future of Ananda, is that power and that grace is really very, very strong. And so we're living still in the city, and we're about 30 minutes drive away from what is now rural land, but eventually I think all land in India is going to be engulfed by the population centers everywhere. But right now it's rural land, very beautiful, 5.5 acres of land. We have a website that's always updating what we're doing. Yeah, the website is gurukripaforesthermitage.org, and things are going very, very well. We are working with planting a lot of trees. We're harvesting a lot of strawberries right now, which is really unusual in that little area that we're in. Just we planted about 700 strawberry plants several months ago, and with some of the guidance and ideas from, Haley and Navashan there. And so, just everything's going wonderfully there. And so now it's just a joy to be here in Palo Alto and seeing many very dear, dear friends. The topic tonight is about just how to find peace in ourselves, how to find centeredness in a world that is crazy at times. I laugh because twice now, so I live in India, I come back to America about once a year. And twice now, once was during the pandemic. I came back after 3 years because there was no traveling during that time. So after 3 years, I came back. And this last year, coming back, both times, I jokingly asked someone, so did I miss anything while I was gone? Did anything happen here that I missed? And it's just, this world is pretty crazy at times, and it's getting that way. We have to be ready for it. And I noticed that when we were going through the pandemic, in India, it was extraordinary how intense it was. We all knew a lot of people who were dying, and it was very, very intense. And it came very suddenly. And we realized that, I think the whole planet realized, that we have to be ready for anything. We really do. It can happen just like that, where things really, really change. And Swami Kriyananda talked about this over the many years, encouraged us to be ready for anything by land in the country, which is what we did there in North India, and be ready, as you've done here with Ananda Farm. But more, it's to be ready inside, and how to find that centeredness, no matter what the circumstances are. That's a big challenge. And the way to do that is to not identify with the changing events outside of ourselves. We still have to deal with them, and we have to deal with the repercussions in our lives. We have to be ready for anything. But when we find a way to regularly go to what doesn't change, which is at our center, which is really beyond time and space, here and now, the eternal now, again, is what Yogananda would call it. When we can do that, then we can deal really, really much more effectively with everything that's going on in our lives. And whether it's world events or national events or just personal events, things happen. We all go through things that we have to deal with. And so a lot of what our practices do is they help us to relate to all of it from a very strong spiritual center. And it's not easy to do when we're in the midst of chaos and stress and anxiety and all these things. One of the ways is the topic tonight, which is the way of now, which is being in the here and now. Because so much of stress and anxiety, worry, what do we worry about? We worry about what's going to happen. We worry about stuff that did happen, everything except but what is right in front of us right now. This is one of the things I really learned, and I think all of us during the pandemic, that, we couldn't deal with the big event, and we couldn't influence it, but we could help those who were around us right here and now. Those are our family members and those people who were in our neighborhood, our vicinity. And so it's the same here with all of you here and your Sangha here. And I always go back to something that is an autobiography of a yogi that Anandamoyi Ma said. It was a very charming thing that she said, where Yogananda was asking her about her life. And she said, yes, I was born and I came into this body and I was just the same. Yeah, I'm not a good friend with microphones. Okay. That was like a bolt of lightning that electrocuted him, and I was just the same. He wasn't the same, but I was just the same. But no matter what happened around her, and then she said, I will always be the same, I am the same. And the same is true for each of us. She just realized it and understood and was in touch with that part of her that is just the same at all times. And we identify with those things that aren't the same. We tend to identify with the things that change, with our changing bodies as they age, with health challenges as our body changes, with events outside of ourselves, with job changes, with career changes. We identify with those changes, and because of that, stress comes and anxiety comes. But if we can just come back to that which doesn't change, two things happen. One, our consciousness becomes much bigger, and so when our consciousness is small, it's a little bit like a small mud puddle, and you take a big rock and you throw it in the mud puddle and it makes this gigantic splash. And it's very chaotic and it's very dramatic. And then when our consciousness is much bigger and more expansive, the ocean, that same size rock or an even bigger one gets thrown into the ocean and it just gets swallowed up into the ocean. There's very little effect that you see from it. And so it's the same with how we are able to transcend changing events and circumstances in life, is to try to tune in to that which doesn't change by, one, expanding our consciousness, but also by trying to find a way every day to get into this moment here and now. I found during the pandemic that the best way is a tool that we don't usually think of as tuning into the eternal now and being in the moment, which is the Hong Sau technique. Because when we do Hong Sau, we think of it as a tool for peace and calmness, which it does, slows the breath, slows the heartbeat. But in a way, the way that practice works most effectively is if we can see it as a tool for just being here and now. My only job right now is to watch my breath. Watch my breath coming in, watch my breath going out. My only job is to be sitting here in this moment, watching the only thing that I can even notice, which is the breath. I've seen that, and similarly, there's a few friends I really enjoy going on hikes in nature with, because there's certain few friends that I know, when I go on a hike with them, we don't talk about stuff. We don't catch up on what have you been doing and what happened back then and what's happening in the future. And we just go very simple, like children. And the most dramatic and anxiety-ridden thing that happens during a hike is, do you know what that bird is? I don't know what that bird is. Can you tell me? And it's being in the moment. And what happens when you go, even on an outward experience like that, but you're in the moment, is that it's extraordinarily refreshing. You go back to your daily life and it's still there. That's not going to change. It's still going to be a drama that's happening, but we're much more able to deal with it. But we're also coming from a place of inspiration and centeredness. When we can live our lives, when we are in God during the day, then we start making the right choices. We start saying the right things. Swami Kriyananda talked about this. He said that one time he was swimming in a lake up towards Ananda village, and it was a long mountain lake with a dam at one end. And he was swimming in the lake towards the dam, and the water was very warm, just almost like bath water, and it wasn't very mountain refreshing like water. But then he said he went swimming towards the other end of the lake where the water was coming in from the melting snow in the mountains. And he said that end of the lake, the water was invigorating, refreshing, was really, gave a lot of life force and energy to him. And he said that meditation every day is like going to that end of the lake. When we meditate, we go into those cool, refreshing waters of God, and we're inspired, we're uplifted. But the other side of that is that in the moment, we start getting into the flow of divine grace, where we start making the right choices, and we say the right things, and we make the right decisions, we meet the right people. And it's not us doing it anymore, but we still have to act, we still have to do these things. Asha just reminded me of for me, a dramatic experience of that, which is that photo of Swamiji up to the left of the altar where he's pranaming. I took that photo on Easter Sunday in 2011, and it was one of those magical, grace-filled moments that happened only because at that day I was really in tune with this flow of grace. I went to the Sunday service that Sunday. I never took a camera to the Sunday service and took photos because I didn't want to bother Swamiji. I didn't want to be restless and distracting. That morning, I felt outer light coming from outside and inner divine light coming from Swamiji. It was just almost like a movie where it was exaggeratedly astral with the light. And I clicked 3 photos or 4 photos, and I had no idea how they came out at the moment. I put the camera down. Then I went home and I looked at the photos. 3 of them were out of focus because the autofocus was out of focus. It was focusing on the background. Only one of the photos captured, and it was the best one, which was that one there. And it would not have happened if I had not somehow been in this flow of being in the moment and listening to what was trying to happen, not in some, overly important way of, Master, what do you want me to do today? Should I take the camera? Should I not take the camera? It was just very natural to pick up the camera and say, okay, let's see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen. And so when we find those ways of getting in tune with God in meditation every morning, every evening, however we can do it, then we get into that flow of grace. And we really start tuning into our eternal nature, the eternal nature of God. We start getting caught up a lot less with all these things that are going on. Swamiji wrote about it in another way in the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, where he talks about both time and space as being really integral to this great delusion that Divine Mother has created. Because that's really where we get caught. All events, what are they? They're bound by people moving through space. And people moving through space, what is that? It's time. You see a person moving here, that's time, ding, ding, ding. And so time and space is how Divine Mother created this delusion. And the yogi's job is to try to understand how to transcend that. When you read the poem Samadhi, what is the last few lines on that? Where Master says, eternity and I, one united ray, I, a tiny bubble of laughter, have become the sea of mirth itself. And again, preceding going into Samadhi and becoming the sea of mirth, I became united with eternity and I. I'm going to read what Swamiji says about the way of the yogi and how to do this. The yogi should live mentally beyond time and space. How do you do that? He can begin by, in a sense, transcending space, becoming deeply aware of being right here, wherever here is. As a diver at sea can plunge under the surface and find himself in a medium where all seems one and the same, so even a traveler who feels himself to be fully present, wherever he is at the time, thinks not of where he came from or of where he is going. And how often are we thinking elsewhere than where we are right now? One of the joys of flying, I've had my best meditations on these long international flights, and I realized one of the reasons is what Swamiji says here, because I'm not thinking of where I came from or where I'm going. I don't have the phone. I can't call people where I came from. I can't call people where I'm going. I'm just kind of in some space that's completely out of the realm of space, high up in the clouds. The more he becomes centered in himself, indeed in his own depths, the more he feels that he is in contact with things and with people who may even be far away. The best way to understand other people and even abstract projects and problems is to be centered within oneself first, and from that center, to intuit realities with which he has no outward connection. With practice, success can come to him with relative ease. And this is the practice of being in the moment and being in tune with God and somehow making the right choices, saying the right things, being joyful. Because once we are in tune with that ray of eternity, the tiny bubble of laughter becomes the sea of mirth. And then he talks about time. The next stage is to try to live in the present moment. If one can do that by living behind the moment, as it were, in the eternal now, he will comprehend more easily what happened in the past, what is likely to happen in the future, and how to condense into insights that require hardly a moment, a labor that might reasonably take a person months or years. And what he's saying is, if you're in the moment, in the eternal now, what I liken it to is if when we are united with God to the degree that we're one with God, God is in every moment and every past, present, future, everything that's ever happened, everything that ever will happen, it's all in God all at once. It's kind of like a CD or a DVD where the whole movie is there on that DVD. And when we watch the DVD, we can only be in one moment as it plays. We're in the moment of the movie, but the whole movie is there. And if we're in the DVD, if we are in God, the whole movie is already there. I read an amazing vision of a disciple of Master's, Brother Kriyananda, and he had this vision of Yogananda coming to him, and Yogananda showed him his book of life. And it was Kriyananda's book of life. It was his life. And it was a huge book with golden letters and golden light. And Kriyananda says that Master opened the book, and there in these big pages was this lifetime that he was living as a disciple of Master. And he showed him all the events of this life were in the pages of that book. And then he turned the pages backwards, and each 2 pages was past lifetimes, from going all the way back. I mean, it was a big book. It was a really big book. And then he started turning the pages forward, and all his future lives were there in that book. And this is where the mind has a hard time understanding, because, the whole thought of, well, is there destiny and free will, and it's already happened, and what choice do I have? And I'm not going to go there because I don't understand any of that either. I don't think you can with our intellect. But everything that's ever happened, ever will happen, is already here and now. And what Swamiji is saying, I think this is why Swamiji was able to see into the future and make choices about people, about decisions. Ananda, in Ananda, Sacramento, when he was guiding the work there, they were wanting to open a bookstore, and there was a location that they had looked at. It was, in many ways, it was a nice location. But when Swamiji saw it, he said, any business will not succeed in that location. He just knew it. He could see into the future. And they did open the first bookstore there, and it didn't succeed. And he saw it all, not because he was, like a psychic or a prophet or anything in the way that we might think of it. It's because that when you're in the moment, in the eternal now, you see the future, you see the past, and you understand people, you understand the flow of events, the flow of time, and you start making the right decisions. This is something that really helped us in India when the pandemic came. We were really trying to tune in where to find land for a monastery. It was clear that this is something that was the right thing to do. It was a very strong, I guess you could say it was an intuition. And we could have gone anywhere in India. And somehow the needle kept pointing to North India near Chandigarh, a place where Ananda didn't have a center, where Ananda had never done big events, but somehow it kept pointing there. And after we went there, we still tried to tune in and see how it felt to be there. And even then, we started tentatively looking at land. But then at a certain point, we found out like 3 different things. One was that Swamiji, when he came to India in 2005, one of the very first places he wanted us to look for land, and he sent someone to look for land to build a community, was near Chandigarh. And it came back to him that, well, the land there is really expensive. It is, but that didn't stop us. You know how expense never stopped Swamiji. Somehow it seemed like the more expensive it was, that the more value it has, really, is what it is. And so we were there. Then we found out that he said that he would be reincarnated in that Punjab region. We had no idea at the time that we were looking there. And then there was one more where he really spoke highly of the energy and of the people up there in many ways. And so this came not from being brilliant, not from being smart, not from looking at all the list of choices and putting them in columns and pluses and minuses. Swamiji would talk about this man in World War II as the war was coming. And we see events heading in dramatic ways now. I mean, I personally wouldn't be surprised if we saw a world war in my own lifetime, and I don't have a lot of years left. But this man saw the war coming. He had this vision, of foreseeing something in the future. And as I think we almost all know, he went all over the world and looked at all the ideal places to get out of the field of battle. And he found this really, really remote island in the South Pacific, which was the island of Guam, which is where the greatest battles of that war ended up being, right where he ended up moving. This is the intellect trying to figure things out. But when we're in tune with God, then the right steps are made, the right choices are made. We also just magnetize the right people into our lives. Now, anxiety and stress are going to come. I think they come to everybody. And I think at times they're going to come a lot more in the coming years. I think you start feeling it now. During the pandemic, I really felt that there was like an energy in India that you couldn't avoid being touched by that energy, and that it affected everybody. I was just reading some letters from Sister Gyanamata where one of the disciples was writing to Gyanamata, a master's disciple, and saying what a difficult time she was having with meditation and with everything. And Gyanamata said something interesting. This was just as World War II was starting to heat up. It hadn't reached that point yet. And Gyanamata said that the sufferings and the violence of the war that was starting to happen in Europe was affecting especially people who were devotees and meditators, because there's a sensitivity and an openness there. And Gyanamata said, you're being affected by that. And the answer, of course, is to be stronger, to be more magnetic, to not be touched by these things, to be touched especially by the people around us and spend more time with each other. I was just sharing with Asha something I just read, where people who have a strong genetic predisposition for depression usually get that depression to some degree. But what was interesting, and it was a whole study of nature versus nurture, this whole idea that genetics or environment, which one really influences. But what they found was that spouses who did not have any genetic predisposition or any predisposition to depression, 1/3 of the time they would get depression if they were married to someone who had that strong sense of it. And so what we have with all of us is that this power of coming together in satsang and meditating together and being together. I don't think we realize or understand what a great power there is in that. And this is what I've seen in Ananda people over the decades, that those who stay close and stay in this environment of other people as much as possible, they are really touched by it. Even when we don't always make the right choices, stumble spiritually, and are working out our karmas. There's an extraordinary power in the influence of like-minded souls like we all have here. I'll just say a couple more things, and then I'm just going to maybe open it up for some questions. One thing that I discovered with finding that peace within is something I may have shared here before, which is that about 4 years ago, I had a traumatic brain injury in India from a fall that I had, and I really smashed my head. And for about 2 years, it was really affecting me. Now I'm actually better than ever because it really forced me to really work on healing the brain and doing all the right things and foods and supplements that really improve the brain. But the first 6 months were really intense. I could hardly sleep at night. And what I discovered was that all kinds of really irrational thoughts were coming into my head, and really negative thoughts, and just worry and anxiety and what if, and oh, this person and that, and maybe I should do this, and really irrational things that I should maybe try to do. And I reached a point where I realized that what happened was that all the wires were crossed in my brain. And so with the wires crossed, it's just like it would be crossing the wires on a computer, or just putting in a bunch of virus, or garbling up the software in a computer. And the same thing was happening in my brain. And I realized I can't trust my own thoughts. And that was a revelation. I realize to this day I can't trust my own thoughts, and maybe we should all come to that realization at some point. And it doesn't mean we should mistrust every thought, but we shouldn't just believe something just because we think it. And how often do we think something and we know it's true, and then we find out later, oh my God, I was really wrong on that. And it's surprising how often we can be wrong. And what it means is just to be aware, to really, when we have a thought, stop and look and listen. And the other thing I found was that some advice someone said, when you start having these irrational thoughts about situations and things and people, ask yourself, who said that? Dramatically, who said that? And when I started asking that, I realized nobody said that. I'm just making it up in my own mind. And these are ways that we can really get out of stress and anxiety by just introspecting and watching our thoughts and seeing what comes up and just checking with other people. The other thing I found was that in these times when I would be up all night and just these irrational thoughts were coming to me, is a few things. One was just going into my heart, because the thoughts, the hardware and the software was all messed up, and so I couldn't fix that. But my heart was still there, strong. I was a disciple of Yogananda. I had love for the God and the Guru. I had my Guru Bhais. And when I went into my heart, that was always right, and that was always there, and that was always good. And so that was one thing that I would do. The other thing that I've learned to do when I'm dealing with jet lag, because I'm dealing with jet lag so many days of my life, as it seems, and you try to fall asleep, you can't fall asleep because it's daytime where you just came from. And you're not supposed to get up and just start doing things, because that totally sets all your rhythms off. The advice, and I found it to be really good, is to stay in bed, keep your eyes closed, and essentially pretend that you're asleep, just to kind of reset the rhythms, but you're still awake. And so I do a few things. One is watching the breath is really good, because then you're just totally out of the thoughts and the mind. And you can go into a very restful state, even when you're still awake. The other one I've been doing lately that I just only discovered in these last 2 trips I've been taking, is that I've been playing Swamiji's music in my head, and his instrumental music. And I take certain songs and I know them so well, having heard them so many times. I play them in my mind, instrumental pieces with multiple parts, and I can hear them. And I'll play them just over and over and over again, as if I'm playing a recording. And it's actually better than listening to a recording, because when you're just listening to a recording, and I think we all know this when we sing in the choir, when you're just listening, there's a certain degree of passivity. Yeah, there's a lot of receptivity, but when we sing a piece of Swamiji's music, there's this really full engagement. You're inside the music, it's flowing through you, it's part of you, and it's very dynamic. And so try this sometime when you're trying to fall asleep. Take a piece of Swamiji's music. See, the instrumental music, try that, because music with words, we were singing them all the time. We were driving and we're singing. But the instrumental music, it goes deeper and is more subtle. Maybe your experience might be different, but experiment with that. This is why when people are advised on how to fall asleep, they count sheep. We've all heard, yeah, you count sheep. I don't even know what that means. I guess you see sheep jumping over a fence and you count them or something. The other one people do now is you count backwards from 100 in increments of 7 or something like that. But what this does is it gets you in the moment. It gets you in the here and now and gets you out of thinking of tomorrow, yesterday, that place I was at, that place I'm going to. And there's an extraordinary power with being in the moment. Just really, in the coming days, experiment with ways of being in the moment. Like I said, go for a walk with a friend out in nature and see if you can just be silent and in the moment and just observe and talk about what you see in front of you. Go for a walk by yourself without the headphones and without everything, but just going and looking at what's in front of you. I discovered this in Indian cities when I first moved to India, because most of my life has been in nature, even growing up as a child. I spent much of my childhood in a huge forest behind my house. And you go to these Indian cities and the density of the population, talk about a concrete jungle with pollution, with cars, with noise. And it's very hard to see God in that. And it's easy for me to see God in nature. But what I would do is I would be walking. It was the only place I could walk where I was staying at the time, was through the city. And I would try to see God in each person, in each car, in everything that was around me, and not get caught up in, again, thinking of the future, thinking of the past. So experiment with ways of really being in the moment in the coming days, the coming weeks. I'm saying coming days and coming weeks because now we're looking in the future. But when you start introspecting, you realize how much of our time is spent forward, regrets, past, over there, over here, never being here and now. I appreciate, being a child of the 60s and 70s with Baba Ram Dass, that book that he wrote, Be Here Now. And that really has stayed with me because it really is a very deep truth of how we can really find God within ourselves, because we're not going to find God out there, over there, in that time ahead, in that time in the past, but really in the ways that we've been talking about. So any questions that people have that you want to ask about any of these things, anything that we're doing in India, anything you all are doing here?
I loved your comment about how you were dealing with your brain injury and the fact that you elected not to believe some of the things you were thinking. And I don't think you need a brain injury to do that. I find that that's very helpful for me right now. I don't think I have a brain injury, but
I think we all have brain injuries, actually. Yeah, I think as our brains age, stuff happens, and we just we have to accept that.
I love that. Who said that?
Who said that?
Was
okay.
that right?
Something that I may have heard before. So I have two questions. If you could tell us a little bit more about what Swami said about reincarnating in Punjab.
Yeah.
And then also if you could tell us about the land, what's happening.
Okay. Yeah, so Swamiji told some people in India, he said, if I reincarnate, at that time he was saying if, I will reincarnate in the Punjab region because of the high energy there. I think one person said he would reincarnate in a Sikh area, the Sikh religion, which they're really high energy. And so he said that to a number of people in India. At that time, it was if I reincarnate. Later in his life, he did indicate that he would reincarnate because he had compassion for us, for others, that he would come again to help people. So, yeah, that's the context of that, which we didn't know until we actually were moving up there. Our land, we have, like I said, 5.5 acres. We've planted probably about 250 trees there already. We'll plant a lot more, over 100 fruit trees. There must be at least 20 different kinds of fruits that we planted. A lot of mangoes, lychee, chiku, custard apple, sitafal, oranges, grapefruits, lemons, pomegranates, guavas, a lot of mangoes. Mangoes do really well up there. So a lot of fruit trees, and fruit does really, really well in that area. That land, trees grow really, really fast. Some of the trees that we planted in the last 2.5 years ago are already 15 feet tall. So it's going to be a forest very soon. And I think just with climate change, you need to be living where there's shade and some shelter. So that's going really, really well. We have one of our monks who's really avid about gardening, and he was like our other great gardener, Ananta, who's a graduate of Stanford University. This guy's a graduate of one of the IIT universities in India, which is the best universities in India with electronic engineering programming degree. And he's applying that creativity and energy towards gardening and really learning and working with our local people to really learn gardening. Like I said, we planted 700 strawberry plants and are harvesting. They told me the other day, it was the very first big harvest. We harvested, I think it was 280 strawberries. I don't know that they counted each and every one, but they showed a photo of it. And they're just amazingly bright, shiny, prana-filled strawberries. Even our neighbors who are Ananda Permaculture Farm, who have a permaculture farm, they had never even considered growing strawberries because people thought you couldn't grow them in that local area. And now they're very avid about the whole idea and wanted to grow strawberries. And so just the gardening is going really well. We grow a lot of vegetables. We're not into selling vegetables. That's not what we're doing. We share any surplus with people. We're not trying to be farmers because our work of our monks is really spreading Master's teachings. And so they do a lot of traveling. All of them do. Our gardener monk is also really avid about Swamiji's music. He's really learning guitar really, really well. He's learned piano. He can play some of Swamiji's complex piano pieces. And this is our year of chanting in the monastery where Prashad and Taig came and visited and really did some chanting workshops. We also just had a retreat near Rishikesh with monks, Ananda monks from all over the world. Gopala from Italy, our monks from all over India, Prashad and Taig from the US. And we had about 5 days of very inward, long meditations, a lot of chanting in a remote place up north of Rishikesh called Anand Lok. Some of you may have been there. It's right near Vaisishta Gufa, the cave that's near there. So there's a very strong energy and magnetism. We're working with our architects closely with, finalizing designs we're choosing tiles and all these things that even as the walls are going up. And we're following Swamiji's architectural suggestions of not having square corners in buildings. He talked about how the Native Americans, the reason they lived in a round building and why he was avid about domes in the early days of Ananda is because the energy moves more freely. And we are reaching the point where we're soon going to be building these domed roofs for our buildings, for our living spaces. There's a local technology using bricks. It's kind of like an arch where, stone arch just supports itself. And there's a local way of doing that with bricks that makes a very gentle not a really sharp dome, but a very gentle dome with the bricks cemented together. And so just we're trying to follow Swamiji in everything that he said, including development of a monastery. He didn't want monks living under one roof in a big institutional monastery with dormitories and everything. He wanted monks living in individual cottages or kutirs. So it's all coming up. And by the end of the year, I think some of us will be living there. Partly depends on the government permissions to get an occupancy certificate. We're going by the rules there, unlike what we've done before in India. So we have to do everything properly and do it at the right time. But yeah, it's going very, very well. We have a lot of animals on the land. A lot of mongoose are there. I saw a mongoose not long ago. We have cobras and other snakes there. But that's what attracts the mongooses there. They eat the cobras, and no one's ever been bitten in that area for a long, long time. So there's peace in the animal kingdom and the human kingdom there.
I was wondering, when you're playing songs in your head, the non-word songs, do you hum?
No.
Okay.
You can. I'm not saying no, but I don't. And it's a couple songs that are favorites of mine that I listen to a lot. And one is a song that we had a concert in Kolkata in January. And that song was played, New Dawn, which is from the Mystic Harp, with it's a violin and piano. We had a really good violinist that played on that. There's a recording somewhere online of it, and a very well-attended spiritual fair that we did in Kolkata. And Prashad was there playing the music also. Other questions?
Could you share a little? It's just that those two microphones are interacting with one another. That's what is it. Could you share a little bit about Swamiji's guideline on renunciation that he left many, many years ago, and how you're taking inspiration from that and implementing in building a real-life monastery?
Yeah, renunciation. Renunciation is, as Shankara would say, it's an inside job. And it's not the clothes you wear, the color you wear. And it's a challenge in India because what partly inspired Swamiji to create the Nayaswami order was seeing Swamis in India that we weren't living it very well, that was just about wearing the color and developing spiritual pride by being a Baba. And there are some true Swamis and renunciates there, but he was wanting it to be really an inward thing. And so Ananda people are renunciates. And I think our household renunciates are some of our greatest renunciates. The monks and nuns who work with renunciation, it's a different thing. And it's not for everybody. There's pitfalls and ups and downs of both sides of it. I write about a whole chapter on that in the book on Kriya Yoga, because I've lived both and I've seen a lot of both. And you can see a lot of self-involvement at times, pride with people who do the outward monk or nun approach. You can also see a real transcendence when it's done really inwardly and selflessly. With our monastery, there's always an awareness that we can't just do this for ourselves. We're going to get away from the world and find God in this very nice place. There's two ways that we sort of avoid that with our monks. First of all, the monks that we have they're just so selfless and joyful and giving, and there's a lot of understanding of this. But one is that we all see that we're building this monastery for generations of monks, not just for ourselves, but also as a way to support serving others and giving the spiritual strength to serve others. And so that's something that, for monks and nuns, you really do have to be aware of it. again, I was reading Sister Gyanamata. She was saying the exact same thing. She was saying that she saw with monks and nuns in that place, and I've seen it with monks in that place, that there can be spiritual pride and pride of pedigree and institutional pride, and it's very easy for that to come up. And so you have to be aware of that. And I think for some people that it's actually better to not go that route, because how do you get out of self-involvement? Well, get married, have a child who's crying in the middle of the night, self-involvement goes right out the window as you have to help someone else. And I think Divine Mother kind of puts us in different situations, and I think we go maybe back and forth, lifetime after lifetime at times, to learn these different lessons. What we have with the monastery that Swamiji described, he wrote about the kind of monastery that he wanted Ananda to have when the timing is right, is the big caveat. And he described a hermitage, and that's the word he used, and a monastery that had a real strong daily routine and schedule where monks came to serve together, to take direction and guidance from senior monks. And that, again, that goes very different from the traditions in India, where monks, they're more solo monks, and what he described as more team monk. And so not every, even renunciate, has the inclination and the way of being part of a monastery. For some, it's better to be a monk serving and living on their own rather than being part of a monastery. And so both opportunities are there in India. And so he also described strong daily group meditation 3 times a day, a real routine that we have. When we first experimented with that way in India and other times in Ananda in the past, things were more fluid and free-flowing and not so defined. And it wasn't working yet again when we were living in India, and I was starting to guide the monastery. And so we read what Swamiji said, and we decided, okay, this is our last chance. Let's at least try what he gave us and see if it works, because this isn't working. So we went through what he wrote. We wrote on this big poster board the daily routine based on everything he said. And it was like, I looked at it and I thought, I can't do that. This is so rigid and uninspiring, and it's just this is so un-Ananda-like in a certain way. It was probably my ego, or also just maybe my skepticism was there. But we didn't have a choice. We decided, okay, we're going to do this. And we had a small group of monks that was outside of Pune in a place called Kandala. And as soon as we started living that life, there was just so much joy. It was just like divine grace came because we were doing the will of God and what Swamiji wanted us to do. And there was joy and laughter, and far from being rigid and constrained, it was just very, very, very joyful. I was telling Asha at our monastery with our monks, there was so much laughter there. We did a satsang with Prashad and Taig about music because they were training us, and it was the monks from all over the world. And they did a satsang and sort of a class on Ananda music and Ananda chanting. Prashad shared it with Dambara because he works with the music ministry at the village to listen to and just to learn from what we are trying to learn out there, far away from the center. And he wrote me and said, is there always that much laughter there? And I said, yeah, it's always like that. And so I think it's just when you are doing the will of God willingly, even when it seems, quote, hard and, not, to my own nature, because that's not my nature, is to be part of something like that. There's joy that comes. And so that's part of the life. The other thing that Swamiji wanted for an Ananda monastery, when the timing is right, we've never been able to do it in Ananda's existence. He wanted monks to be serving with each other and just with each other, and not to be part of a work scene where you go off to work during the day and you come back to the monastery. So that's what we do. He said, monks should have 30 minutes of recreation every day. And I think this is based on something that Swamiji, or Master had Swamiji do. And so on our schedule on the wall, 30 minutes of recreation, it was like written in there. And again, it seems rigid and just like really defined. But again, there was just so much joy in it. And, we would play badminton and go for walks when we were doing that at that time. And so, when you follow the will of God, joy is there. And I think we all know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. Even when it's difficult, even when it goes maybe against our own nature, because I think a lot of us who have given our lives to Ananda, what we are doing and how we are doing it, the expression of it, is against what our own inclination would be, to be living in a city or to be talking in front of a bunch of people rather than being a hermit in a cave. But when we do the will of God, then grace comes and we enter into that flow of grace. So there's more sort of details, but that's kind of, we talk a lot about it. We use Swamiji's Sadhu Beware and his techniques of being an ego detective. And we have fun with that. One of the techniques of being ego detective is that if someone, points something out that maybe you did wrong, that you don't defend yourself. And so there's a teasing in the monastery about, you jokingly chide someone for something and they get a little defense. Oh, got you. And it's always laughter and joy. There's no actual real finger pointing. But it brings it to our awareness that this is what we're working on. And it really helps to have a strong group where we are working on it together. And for me, what's so heartening is seeing extraordinary growth in every single one of these guys. For me, that's kind of the ultimate proof that we're doing what Swamiji wants us to do, is that there is such spiritual growth happening with each and every one of them, and joy and attunement, ever deeper attunement. And just a simplicity of life also, because life gets complex, and we have to make a conscious effort to live simply and to have a garden, grow some food, have simple activities that we do. And so it's harder to do in a city, but I think we have to really try to do that. I'm going back to what we're doing now with our land and having gardens and simple little huts in a way. Gary came when I was at Ocean Song. He showed up at Ocean Song one day to live there, and I think that's where you came to Ananda and really to an Ananda community for the first time. And it was just a joy getting to know Gary at that time, and just the simple living that we did there, and living in trailers and teepees and that kind of thing. If we could have done that where we are in India, we might have done that. But one of the things I saw is that whenever we had monasteries with temporary buildings, it was always a temporary monastery with temporary monks. And those monasteries all went away. And that was part of the understanding that we need to actually build buildings and do it legally where the government approves of it, and it can be there for the decades and for the ages. We're also doing it in such a way that we can help others if there's a real need to be able to feed others. So we're really learning how to grow a lot of food, even though that's not our mission. But we're learning all the different foods that grow there, how to grow them, because there's a lot of really good staple foods that grow really well there. I mean, we grew peanuts and made peanut butter, and just peanuts is like so productive on that soil, on that land there. And so, we want to be ready if suddenly there was a world event that people needed to be fed and housed, and just there's an awareness of that. And I wonder sometimes if what we're doing with our monastery, but also being prepared to really house and serve others, whether the monastery is plan A or the other is plan B, or whether the other is plan A actually in God's eyes. Even our neighbors and friends, Ananda Permaculture Farm, I think we've talked about them. They're not part of Ananda Sangha. They chose the name Ananda without knowing us. And we somehow found our way. I know Haley and Navashan have been there and met our friends there, Agam and Manisha. And she had a vision of the world going crazy. She had this understanding that civilizations rise and we get so caught up oh, we're so modern, plumbing, electricity, but then she had this vision of Pompeii, which had all those things, and other great civilizations. They all went under and turned to dust. And she understood that with the climate and everything, she just, very intuitive person. She understood that she needed to build a safe haven for friends and family. And so, yeah, even though they have a nice life, they have extraordinary gardens, they sell a lot of produce, that's also the plan B is always there. Even when we were looking at our land to sort of do the site plan, she was kind of helping us with siting some things. And at one point, she said, yeah, leave this space open to house all the refugees when they come. That's the way she put it. And she's not a heavy person. It's not like that's all we ever talk about or think about, but it's there. And it's an awareness, just like you've been doing with, the Ananda Valley Farm. And necessarily so, Master Swamiji said, be prepared. And we need to be prepared. I think the pandemic showed us in India, and that's actually the pandemic in India for us made us realize, okay, this is a warning sign, time to buy land in the country. And just as you've done with the Ananda Valley Farm. And I think the pandemic was kind of a way of showing us that things can change overnight. You just never know. Things can change just like that. You wake up one morning and the world is different. And so be ready, but not anxious about it, and not fearful, but be ready by being aware, doing what you're doing with your farm, and being centered and doing a sadhana, and coming back to that center every day and being in tune with God, with divine grace in those ways. Any other questions, comments? Come on, Devi.
Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about the value of seclusion, and especially at this time, with just working on that deep-centeredness and
Yeah. Swamiji said for renunciates, for people who have given their lives to Ananda, he wanted them to take, I think it was 2 weeks of seclusion a year is what he encouraged. And most of us do. And I can just speak from my experience of seclusion that it really is the best way to plug into eternity and get away from all the restlessness, all the day-to-day stuff that we have to do. And I would encourage people, even if you've never done a seclusion, start trying it out and experiencing it. Every seclusion is different. I'm going to be doing one in about a month from now at Ananda Village for a few weeks. Every seclusion is different. You don't know what it's going to be. But what I have found is that even seclusions that were very challenging and difficult, even if there was one really, really deep meditation where I had a really deep experience of God, just one time in that 2 weeks, that carried me for a very, very long time. Because what I have found with experiences in meditation, I'm not talking about visions and phenomena, I'm just talking about having an experience of God as divine bliss or divine joy or extraordinary expansion, that those experiences are like, I don't know, they're just touchstones where we've touched on the divine. And when later on in life, I still go back to early experiences I had my first year at Ananda, where I had an experience or a few of divine grace and divine joy. And it's accessible. It's kind of like that window is still open for me to touch on it and draw on it. And so seclusion is really a way to really carry us the rest of the year and the rest of our lives. Because just that, just one, there's an expression that Swamiji would often say, one moment in the company of a saint can be your raft across the ocean of delusion. And I think just one deep experience of God, one deep meditation can be our raft across the ocean of delusion, because when we have that one experience, we realize this is the reality. This is the only thing that's real. And this world outside seems so real. It's so compelling, but it's just a big drama. The one who created this, she really enjoys drama, I think. I think it would be sort of a little bit too far to say she's a drama queen, but I think you could almost say that because of how much drama there is in this world and in our individual lives, in everything that we do. And it's easy to take that as the reality. And it's easy to take that seriously if we don't go back and try to have once a year, especially, having a deeper experience of stillness and silence. And sometimes it takes 1 or 2 weeks. Just like when you shake a jar that has a lot of dirt and soil in it, you set it down, and sometimes it takes a very long time for all that to settle down and to see the clear water there. And it's like that with seclusion. Sometimes it just takes time. And it doesn't mean you meditate 10 hours a day. You know, if you're at the Ananda meditation retreat, you can take long walks every day. You can sit and meditate on the deck and look out into the trees. So it's not just, tapasya meditation only. It can also just be a joyful thing, being with God is what it is. And I think that's really what seclusion is. It's how to be with God. And to do that, we have to leave ourselves behind also and just kind of get out of our stuff. And that's a challenge to do. I discovered this. I share it in the Kriya Yoga book, where before I came to Ananda, I decided that I was going to be a hermit yogi. And I didn't know about communities yet at that time and that whole idea. And so I would save money. I would go up into the mountains of California and spend 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. I'd bring a bunch of food with me. Maybe once in the middle of it, I would get some more food, and I would be by myself for many weeks at a time. And I didn't have a real spiritual path yet. I knew some meditation practices. I knew walking the woods and talking to God. And my thought was that by getting away from the world and getting away from everyone else, that I would find peace. And as I share in the Kriya Yoga book, I found that no matter how far away I got, someone was always there. It was this fellow Devarshi was chattering in my head and complaining and thinking of this restless idea and that. And so you have to do it in the right way. You have to get away from ourselves. And that's why we need devotion. We need self-offering. We have our practices. We have Kriya Yoga, which is done as a self-offering, because when we really consciously work with getting rid of our little self and offering it deeply in meditation, that's when we get away from ourselves, and that's really when God takes us away from ourselves, really. And service does that too. But if it's only service, it can become restless, and it can become outward. But service is essential. I'm seeing that with our monks and with our monastery, that meditation by itself isn't enough. And service by itself, yeah, it can be enough, I think, if one does it right. But from what I've seen, the power of what we have is when we really work with it all and put it all together in certain ways. And I think there is a blessing for the world also when we take seclusion, that somehow there's so few people doing that in this world, of really going deep into God and Guru and praying for others, that I think there's also a blessing for the world and for all of us whenever one of our Guru Bhais takes a serious seclusion. Anything else? I'm going to go stay at Ananda Valley Farm here next week, so get to absorb more of their knowledge and garden vibes. And
We're going to be absorbing from you.
yeah, gardener satsang is a lot of fun, I have to say. It's just, and being in another person's garden is really fun. Somehow, just because every gardener it's so creative. The act of gardening is one of the most creative things there is, because every day is different, every year is different, every climate is different, every crop is different, and just in every way of gardening, people learn different ways of doing it, And gardeners are very appreciative of other ways of approaching gardening and very different ways of doing it. And, we're not all stuck on, oh, this is how you do it. And religion does that a lot. And gardeners tend not to do that because gardening is very humbling in the end, because you realize so much depends on God and weather and nature and bugs and all these things. And you can do everything just so perfect and so right. And, yep, I got it. And all of a sudden there's a total crop failure for one reason or another. And so it's also very joyful because then you also have the success of eating these prana-filled strawberries like right off the plant. And that's one of the things of gardening, is how much prana there is in a fruit or vegetable when it's still alive, because it was just plucked like 10 seconds ago, and there's still prana flowing through it. And I call that grazing, when I go out in the garden and start eating the peas and different things like that. And we have a lot of that on our hermitage land. We do a lot of cover crops, green manure to improve the soil, and some of them are peas that people really enjoy wandering through this field that's this tall and just eating peas and throwing them in your mouth in the moment. Can you share anything about visiting our land? You visit our hermitage again, and
well, one of my first thoughts visiting the land was that, knowing Devarshi was a gardener, it looked like he hadn't had a garden in many years. They have a very large garden for, just a handful of them who aren't selling what they're growing, and we were able to. They had been harvesting the day we had been out there, so we were staying with Bharat and Shamini, and we took home bags of vegetables, and we had probably the best meal we had our whole time in India, because it was fresh from the land, and we just cooked it very simply. But it was, like you were saying too, just so fun to be in somebody else's garden and to see the creativity and just to feel the love and devotion. And it's all God's garden, and it's just manifesting in different ways through different forms and different people caring for it. But there was like these beautiful, huge, what were they? The coreopsis, the tick seed plants that were just, and it was fun to just see these different things, and they're just trying things, and you just see, in every place it's unique and different, and certain things are huge in other areas and tiny in other.
yeah, there are plants I'm used to growing in the U.S. that get gigantic in India, and just the one that she was talking about, and there are others that just totally fail and completely die, and it's just a joy experimenting and learning, like we did with the strawberries. There's success and failure both.
Just hearing you talk about how it's going to be a forest really soon, because I didn't realize this thinking about it, but all the trees, it's like a 9-10 month growing season for the trees, whereas for us here it's a shorter window, so it takes longer. But seeing the potential of just how quickly that's going to turn into such a sight.
Yeah, trees grow twice as fast, I've seen there, compared to America, because the growing season is for the tree is so long.
Yeah, I visited, I've been there twice now, and the first time was about 2 years ago, and seeing the trees they had just planted and then seeing them again, it was really impressive to see how big they had gotten. But just the whole energy there was very sweet. There was a handful of people there that were, we got to see some of the first structures starting to be built, and there was a team of people that were working on the land, and just to feel the energy of them and their reverence for what's happening there was very special. So it's, we can all appreciate, but getting to go there and to just feel the impact this group of people is having on the area and all their neighbors. And Manisha that he mentioned, Ananda Permaculture just up the road, it was, we had a really nice visit with them as well, and it's just very sweet to see how, God has brought these two groups together and just made them neighbors, and just how much good is happening.
Yeah, I feel like we all schemed this on the astral plane with them, and maybe we said, okay, how are we going to recognize each other? Because you're not going to be on the spiritual path. And I know, choose the name Ananda. That's how it's going to happen. because it almost seemed to work that way. I think I've shared this story. I think most of you have heard it, but they spell it A-A-N-A-N-D-A-A. And the reason they do is that in 2010, when they chose that name based on this was their bliss, their joy, that farm, they went to get the domain name, and someone already had ananda.org using the normal spelling. And at that time, that would have been Maria in charge of the ananda.org website. And I was doing that before that, and just we have a lot of joy with that. Her daughters, when they found out that they were going to be getting a visit from Ananda Sangha monks, somehow she must have looked us up or something like that. And the daughters who did all the social media, they were teenagers at the time, now they're in college. But he said, Mom, they're coming out to sue us for the name. she was only joking. They're very, very joyful and funny. So there's a lot of joy there, and satsang, and they're very high energy people. They just had a video. Their YouTube videos are really amazingly watched and popular, but they just did a video on YouTube a few months ago, and in the first 10 days it had 600,000 views. And just people in India are really tuning in to this idea of living simply and getting land. And they're finally avid, just as I was leaving the last time I saw them before coming here. They really want to learn meditation from us now. And just they're interested in that quite a lot also. Yeah. So, yeah. And you guys have stayed with them, right?
Sandhya and I did.
Yeah, Sandhya, yeah. Yep. Okay.
As a non-gardener, I find things like a strawberry is growing there. It's a wonder.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that when any of us can walk around with that wonder, that's part of the prana.
It certainly is. That's a really, really good point. When we have awe and reverence and wonder, we receive that from God. When we have skepticism, cynicism, we receive very little. And speaking as a gardener and non-gardeners both, we also have awe and wonder when we see that strawberry there and pick it. It's just so amazing.
Devarshi, thank you so much. This has been a delight.
Okay, thank
This
you.
has been inspiring.